So, welcome everybody. Today is a very small crowd. Pratima, excuse us for that, but it's a pleasure to have you. I think this is our first talk since Jan 2020 in this space, and we've had no talk since the pandemic here in this space, and I think people are still getting used to coming here. We've had a couple of talks at the Bhandarkar Institute, and this, I've been wanting to have you here for a while, but it expedited at such short notice because we have Jim here today, who is my colleague, friend, ex-boss from the US, and we spent a few years working together in the early 2000s when I was there. And Jim is on a sabbatical to study urban resilience, like I was mentioning and he was talking to you about. And we've been particularly looking at some of the urban settlements, and we had some series of talks on urban issues, and I thought no better person than you to talk about the work that you're doing. So thanks for coming. I'll just quickly introduce Pratima. Pratima is an architect, social entrepreneur. She's founded Shelter Associates in 1993. It's going to be 30 years next year. Ashoka Fellow, known all over the world for her work in working with urban settlements, with the urban poor. She's been doing so much work all over. I visited her office a few years ago, and she showed us what she was doing. And I think it's really important to have these conversations about and bring your work out into a more mainstream audience. And while that audience seems small today, we are recording this, and you can share it on YouTube and all that stuff. So thanks, Pratima, for coming.
It's a pleasure. I'm very happy to be here. I must say that even if it's a small audience, sometimes I think these kind of issues need to be discussed with small groups of people and not really very large, because it allows you a sort of an easy atmosphere to air your questions, and it's easier for me also to address them when it's a small group. So I'm quite happy that that we have fewer numbers here today. I don't want to make it like a one-sided thing. I would really welcome questions as we go along, and if you need to stop me somewhere, please feel free to do that. There are, I think there are just tons of slides out there, but I'm just going to pick and choose the ones which I think might be of interest. And if it gets boring or overwhelming, just let me know, we'll stop there. But I just hope that I'm able to convey this journey of 3 decades to all of you. It's been fantastic. I don't regret even a single minute of it. When I look back and people say, would you have done things differently? I said, no, I'm glad I made those mistakes. I'm glad I, kind of stumbled and fell, because, getting up and then going again with new learnings is a much better way of going on this journey. Is on hindsight, that is what I think, that it's good to make mistakes, because it's really something that teaches you a lot in the long run. So I was talking to Jim, and I was telling him that I'm an architect by training, but when I was studying architecture, I decided I wanted to work in the development sector, and this became a much stronger urge after I did a master's in something called building design for developing country. That was what the course was called, and it was in London at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and we had some very eminent people who taught us on that, who had first-hand experience of working on the ground, which they shared, which made it even more interesting. And when I came back to India in '87, I was kind of clear that I would not pursue mainstream architecture, but I would try and see if I can carve out a niche in the development sector. Mind you, we were again in times where architects hardly ever considered working in the development sector, and I mean that was not even an option. People didn't even think it was an option. So shelter was founded by architects. I had a couple of friends who were architects who also were equally passionate about it, and we started in 1993 this journey. I'll explain these verticals as we go along. These are some of the major verticals that have emerged, which were mostly need-based as we went along. But as architects, we were very clear. We wanted to see how we could bring our learning for the have-nots of the city. Is there a way in which we could, make a difference in their quality of life, in their environment as architects? Because I mean, even today, architecture is mostly elitist. When I came to Pune, I remember there were just 4 colleges of architecture, and correct me if I'm wrong, Khushru, there are about 30 odd colleges of architecture now in Pune. Yeah, and there are thousands and thousands of students who graduate out every year. But unfortunately, I haven't seen any exponential growth in the number of architects who are coming in, working in the development sector, which I still feel there's a huge scope for architects to be doing that, but it's one of the most neglected areas. And I mean, you can make a fantastic career even in the development sector. Okay, so just at a snapshot, our area of work geographically has been Maharashtra. We've been working in a few cities of Maharashtra, from the smallest city like Sangli, Miraj to million plus cities like Pune and Thane. So it's an entire range of cities of different sizes and population that we've worked with. Sanitation and poverty mapping and housing are the 3 major verticals that have emerged. And around that, of course, we have done a lot of work. When we say sanitation, it's not just about toilets. We've done a lot of solid waste management. We're also now looking at menstrual hygiene and anything that goes into the larger umbrella of sanitation. We've done a lot of work during the COVID times. We ran vaccination campaigns, and our data really proved to be a major game changer in those efforts, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But what gives me a lot of happiness is to share that we actually have managed to make impacts at citywide scale when it comes to sanitation, where we know most of our cities have large percentages of our population living in slums who don't have access to anything but a community toilet. So our One Home, One Toilet program was quite a successful campaign, which has reached to almost 4 lakh people directly or indirectly. We've been also lucky, considering how low profile we are, to have had some kind of recognition coming in from the government, from the private sector. Recently, the Forbes recognized our effort in digital addressing of slum homes, which they thought was outstanding, and they featured us in their under the top 21 social entrepreneurs just last year. Of course, this is something that we were really delighted. We got a letter from the Prime Minister of India very recently, which lauded our efforts in the COVID campaign, where we tried to ensure that people in slums got vaccinated, a challenge that we had faced earlier and which the cities had also faced. So a lot of people ask me, why the urban poor? Why not rural areas? And I tell them that I grew up in a city. This is a very familiar environment for me, but in cities where we're all living, most of us are not aware that that there are large percentages who are living in less than 10% of the city's area. Most of them don't have the kind of amenities that you and I take for granted, and while they might be the most vulnerable, who actually lack some of the most essential services like safe sanitation, water, adequate housing, but they are actually contributing to the city's economy. And a lot of us are able to even sit here and go out and work because there's someone who is coming home and helping you out with your day-to-day household chores. I mean, they really are the most important part of how the city works. Without them, I believe without them the cities would collapse. I certainly would. So what has been our theory of change? So we know what the current conditions are. I mean, mostly we know that lack of hygiene, essential services, accessibility to services, also to the agencies who provide these services. So how did we deal with it? So first we said that we need to strategize. We need to have first data in place, because unless we have evidence-based data, nobody is going to take us seriously. Unless we have everybody participating towards, working out holistic solutions, it's never going to work. People should own the process. So we had a very, very community-centric, multi-stakeholder kind of approach, and data also as part of the strategy. And of course, when it came to action, we believed in working with the poor very, very closely. We believed in working with the cities very, very closely, very, very intensively. So they are not peripheral. We work with them on a day-to-day basis. We are working with the entire range of governance, right from the sanitary inspector to the municipal commissioner, on a very, very regular day-to-day basis. And of course, because of that, because everybody owned the process, we believe that it's important that everyone owns the process, which leads to any good. And that's why the impact has been there to see, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. And of course, our vision, it has all moved towards the vision that there should be equitable distribution of rights for every citizen of India. So why data driven? Why did data become such an important vertical? Because when we started off very early in the early 90s and started working in slums, then we suddenly realized that, we're working in slums where communities themselves don't know anything, what were the numbers. If we went to a slum and asked them, okay, so how many families live here, we would get a huge variety of numbers, anywhere from 100 to 1,000. So people had never even enumerated their own settlements to see how many families lived here. The city, if you went to the city, they had very scattered data, which was hardly usable on the ground because things would have changed quite a bit, and their data was very outdated. So we said that unless we know the ground situation, there's just no way we're going to be able to make any kind of an impact, and we're never going to know what exactly is the problem and where we have to solve it, what are the gaps in delivery of services. So we were a little bit ahead of our time. I remember when we started using GIS software, that's the first technology that we used. It was in the late 90s. The Municipal Corporation of Pune had just one computer at that time. So computerization of slum was something which was totally outlandish. It met with a lot of resistance. They were very upset that people are coming and talking about computers when we hardly have any of those to use. But I mean, that was when we started. It's been a 2-decade journey using technology, and of course we were very quick to use Google Earth when it was launched, because that served as a great base map on which we superimposed our slum data. And then of course, from paper-based service we went into Android apps, which makes it so much easier to collect data, and it sits at the back end like a spreadsheet and analyze it. And so today we have created spatial data for slums across cities. So if any of you visit our website, you will find that we have about 5 or 6 cities where we have spatial data actually laid out, which you can see different layers, which give you a fairly good insight into what are the kind of services that are available. And we're very delighted that the cities have also owned that data, and they have linked their website to our website, so that data becomes available to a much wider audience. And that was possible only because we believe that even when data was done, you have to co-create it. You have to co-create data with the urban local bodies as well as with the communities, because if they are not involved, they will never trust that data, and if they don't trust that data, they will never use it. So it was as simple as that, and so we have made every effort to involve all the stakeholders, even in collecting and validating that data. And as I said, this is the home landing page of the Kolhapur Municipal Corporation, where they have a Shelter Associates logo, which if you click on that, it takes you to the Kolhapur slums and gives you a pretty detailed kind of insight into what exists there. As I said, validation of the data is important. So we would actually take hard copies of our maps submitted to the urban local bodies, and can you see they have actually stamped it. They've stamped it after they've come and done a few checks on the ground to see whether, you know, it really matches the ground. So that was the kind of validation that we did. And if you open, you know, the slum page, you'll see broad level data analytics which is there, which will give you, you know, the broader percentages and whatnot. If you want to know how many kacha pakka, how many people have access to water, how many people have access to a toilet, you know, those kind of things come out. But if you want to sort of go deeper, drill deeper down, you can actually look at the spatial data, which will actually help you understand the situation within each slum.
What do you mean by spatial data?
Spatial means mapping data, you know, not statistical. You actually, so typically like a GIS spatial map, where you can ask, you can query that data and the map will tell you, you know, so you know which are the houses on a map which have water connection, or which are the houses who have access to a toilet, which are the houses who are going, it shows up as a different color. I mean, you give it a color code, and when you run that query, that map tells you, okay, which are the houses which have their own water connection. So tomorrow if you have to decide on where you want to put a community stand post, you're definitely not going to put it in a place where most of the people have water, right? You might want to sort of locate it where most people are dependent on a community water stand post. So that kind of spatial data is laid out. That is an extremely good planning tool. You know, when we were doing the sanitation program and when community toilets was being done in Pune, that was like in the early 2000s, they were only looked at person to toilet ratio. So they said if there were X number of people in a slum, then if you assume that for every seat there should be 50 people, then you need that many stalls available. But then, you know, many of 40% of Pune slums are on hill slopes. So supposing you were to satisfy that ratio, but you had all your toilets on, you know, the lower slopes, people on the upper slopes would not come and use that toilet. They would still defecate up, you know, out in the open, because it's not very accessible, and during rains, you know, it becomes slippery. They don't want to use a toilet where they have to walk for 10-15 minutes and you know, make it. So how you locate your services becomes very important, and if you have spatial data, you'll see those maps as I go along. That makes it useful. And power of data, I mean, I feel that you know, a lot of data that we've collected for sanitation now is being used for water by the water department. It can be used, you know, to track and monitor, say, livelihoods. It can be used for health. It can be used for education. I mean, there's no end to what you can use it for. And it's good to have a centralized data system which people can draw upon, which different departments can draw upon, and make it richer as you go along. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, which is what happens right now. You know, if you go to a municipal corporation, you will find the water department will not talk to the sanitation department, will not talk to you know, the slum department. I mean, they're not talking to each other at all. So none of them know what is happening, what is the kind of data that is there with each you know, department. And then when they have to run a program, they hire consultants, and the consultants are being paid large sums of money to keep doing the same thing. You know, a new consultant comes, he starts again mapping the slum, he starts again, you know, doing data collection. So this is a huge waste, and then at the end of it, people don't know where it is, because every time the officers change, the consultant changes, you know, it's like reinventing the wheel again and again and again.
When you're talking about involving the community and collecting the data so that they have more faith in it because they were involved, what does that process look like? Can you just give an example of how you're utilizing the community to collect?
So for gathering information, because I feel that if communities are involved in gathering their own data, then the quality of data is more reliable as against somebody from outside coming and, you know, gathering that data, because the community people kind of know each other, and so there is not much scope for you to fib or give wrong data, because people around you know, I mean, what is the status, roughly I would say. So the quality of data is much better than if an outsider were to come and gather that. So earlier we would engage them, you know, with paper-based surveys, but nowadays we find that in most communities, in most households, people do have access to a smartphone because the prices are affordable now, and at least there's one smartphone in most of the families. So people who are willing to and the youth come very enthusiastically forward to gather data. We of course have some kind of a remuneration for that because it can sometimes take hours to be doing a data collection, but we just find that involving communities makes a huge difference in the quality of data sets. And then what happens is it's empowering for them, because when they actually start collecting data, they also start understanding their situation much better. So when it starts leading to actual programs on the ground, they are in a better position to appreciate, understand and engage with the process. I don't think I need to really go into what happens when you don't have access to toilets. There's been enough which has been going around under Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, and I'm sure most of you have seen it, but sanitation got prioritized because when we looked at data across cities, we found that while the water situation was not critical, while electricity was not very critical, it was sanitation which was the most critical component, because most families did not have access to safe sanitation. So in urban areas there isn't enough space even to go out for open defecation. Those areas are also shrinking as the cities are becoming denser. So people are forced to use extremely dirty and filthy community toilets, which really become a hotspot for all kind of disease transmission. So but they have no option. So we found that this was the most neglected service across cities, and that's why we decided to focus on sanitation. So our one home, one toilet, which really was something that that evolved over a period of time. And by the time Swachh Bharat Abhiyan was launched, we had already worked out this model. We realized that at the end of the day, giving every family access to their own home toilet was the best solution. And community toilets can at best be a stopgap solution, but that cannot be a permanent solution. So we decided to do it a little differently. We said we should have a cost sharing model, just like we believe in multi-stakeholder participation. Even the financial implications of a program like this should be on a cost sharing basis. So we worked very closely with the municipal corporations, we worked very closely with the communities, and all of them have contributed in this program, which is why it has been so successful. To date, I think we have covered more than 26,000 households with a home toilet across 5 cities of Maharashtra. And this was very interesting, because what happened is, when we did the data, we knew exactly what was the status of the existing sewerage infrastructure in the slum, what was the status of the water connections in slum, and we had household data which also showed us where the gaps were and where there were possibilities to lay new drainage networks. So we worked very closely with the urban local bodies, and then they started building it into their budget. And sometimes, like this particular slum on the left, we did this over 2 years, because we realized that it was not going to be possible for us to cover the entire slum in one year, because they would need to budget for it. So a lot of new lines. Can you see that all these lines were new lines that were laid by the municipal corporation. So there was an investment of crores that people made, the urban local bodies made, and then all these houses in pink are the ones that we facilitated, and there were people who also had their own toilet. The ones in green already had their own toilet. So together the percentage went up quite a bit. I'll just quickly fast forward it. Like this is the kind of impact we had in. Have you all noticed this slum on the way to the airport, Sanjay Nagar? It's very close to the airport, and it has been an eyesore for several years. Most of the people would defecate. Sorry. You must have seen that a lot of blues got changed to pink, right? So this was a particular settlement where a lot of open defecation happened here, and they just had one toilet block, and all these families in blue were using that one toilet block, and so obviously it was not adequate. The toilet to person ratio was huge. It was almost close to 100, one seat, you know, for 100 people. So you can imagine people can't be queuing up for that long. So obviously there was open defecation that was happening here. By the end of our program, most of the blues got converted into pinks. So you had 70% of the households who had access to a home toilet, with a lot of new lines that got laid. And so then now this toilet block is sufficient for the remaining 30% who have not been able to take a toilet for some reason or the other, and it could be even technical. So what I'm trying to say is that, I'll just go up, yeah. So this is the kind of impact that you can see spatially, you know, on a map. Otherwise, if it was just as a statistical data, you don't know, I mean, how the distribution has happened. So this is where we also leverage, you know, for community mobilization also. Now we've started using our spatial maps far more effectively. So what we do is, if this is a settlement, we divided it into pockets of say 200 families or so, and from each pocket we you know, have one volunteer who lives in the community, and we make sure that that volunteer is very involved in this program right throughout. In fact, the volunteers then start disseminating a lot of our IEC material that we have put together. They do a lot of mobilization, and they get to know each and every family within their pocket, and the status of sanitation and water and whatever issues there are. And then, you know, so now in this particular slum, you have about 8 or 9 volunteers who got very empowered over the you know, the period of our sort of intervention in that particular slum, and this helped them. They learn how to look at maps, they learn how to use the map. So I remember in this slum, one of the manholes was overflowing, and they needed to get somebody from the ward office to come and attend to it. And that girl, she just called up the ward office, gave them the plus code, and I'll come to you what the plus code is all about, and said, this is the spot that you need to come to and attend this problem. And using that plus code, the person was able to navigate right to the manhole which was overflowing and fix it. So that is the level of confidence that you start building within the community as you go along. And as I said, you know, we use the volunteers quite a bit. Can you see this lady? She's one of the volunteers there. She's wearing the blue jacket. She runs all the programs. They're very interactive, and we cover the entire you know, age group, like from children to the old. We have snake and ladders, we have puppet shows, we have you know, all kinds of games, hand wash, this, that, everything around health and hygiene, which becomes fun, you know, fun games, and people really like to get involved. And when you give your messaging in this manner, we find that it really then becomes kind of understood, and people actually practice it. So that, I mean, these are some of the awareness workshops. As you can see, we do a lot of workshops with children, especially because they are at an impressionable age, and we believe that, you know, as future citizens, you really need to invest in them. We do a lot of competitions, Swachh Gully competition, World Toilet Day. We also had, I remember Radio City coming on Valentine's Day, because they actually, I mean, people were so delighted because all these years they've never had a toilet at home. So they just went all out and decorated it, and they wrote poems about, you know, how the toilets has changed their life. It was funny, but it also drove very, very strongly the fact that, you know, we've always underestimated the fact that that even in a small house, in a small space, a toilet is a need, is a necessity, and people are willing to eke out a tiny space for a toilet. You know, you said you've been to Tadiwala. We've actually given toilets there. Tadiwala, you know, is a very dense settlement. Yeah. There are people who've taken a toilet even under their staircase. You know, the little space under the staircase has also been changed and converted into a toilet. So people do eke out space. These are the various finishes that you can see. So when I spoke about the cost sharing model, this is what I meant. We got the municipal corporations to lay the drainage networks wherever possible. we raised a lot of funding through corporate social responsibility. So we were able to make the material available at the doorstep of people who were willing to take a toilet at home, and people actually constructed it with their own money. So the expense of construction was borne by the people. So that's how it became a cost sharing model. And can you see that every toilet looks different, isn't it? I mean, every toilet has a different finish. That's because people just went all out and spent much more than just cost of construction. They actually went and bought tiles, because they're working in places like yours and mine. They've seen good washrooms and toilets, and they're very aspirational too. So even if it's unbranded, it doesn't matter. They've gone all out, and bought tiles. Many of them have taken it right up to the ceiling, and they've really done it well. You'll find it very interesting that some of the houses are very kacha, but the toilets are very pakka. And again, data bringing in transparency. We believe that when donors give us, donate towards this cause, they should also know which houses have received the benefit of that donation. So what we do is we send them a link, and they get to see the houses which they have supported, and if they click on that house, what shows up is a fact sheet like this, which gives you at a snapshot, at a snapshot, you can see the photograph of the toilet, the person, for one of the family members maybe, and a little bit about the family. So if they want to track it, and if they want to go and do the visit even without us, it's quite possible, because they would know how to go. Is there a question that you need?
Yes, wait until you finish your point.
Okay. This I've already told.
What is this?
You remember once you'd come, when you'd come, we talked about how redundant CTBs should be made, turned into area resource center.
Yes.
So we are already having these kind of dialogues. We had started this dialogue with the municipal commissioner of Pimpri-Chinchwad, and unfortunately he just got transferred a few weeks ago.
We want to work on them, so.
You also work on them,
No,
right?
we want to.
You want to work on them, and I'm just hoping that we'll have somebody who will come forward and say, yes, let's do it, because this is something that we want to push for. What has happened is that many slums had multiple community toilet blocks, and now because the percentage of people having their own toilet has increased substantially, some of them are very underused. So we are saying that why don't we convert them into area resource center, because slums normally lack meeting places or area resource centers which can be used for multiple things, like maybe
The background here was that we were looking, how can we look at small interventions in the slums, and of course Pratima has been working in there. So I went to meet her, and one of the things she said is that a lot of these common toilets, because she's put in so many individual toilets, the common toilet blocks are becoming redundant.
Yeah.
And then we said, okay, maybe we can come and help you create a creche or a daycare center or a little library. So
or a multi-purpose space, where people can come and use it for various things.
So has it gone anywhere?
No, it hasn't.
Okay, so you have my number, we are on call, we'll help you anytime.
Yeah. This is the kind of impact that we've made in the sanitation space. City-wise I've given it, but what really makes me very happy is to see this kind of thing happening. Pimpri-Chinchwad is our twin city, which is one of the richest municipal corporations, not just in Maharashtra, but across the country. And it had a pathetic sanitation situation when we did this. I mean, we've done 100% survey of all slums. The coverage was only 8% pre-intervention of people having access to a home toilet. That has gone up to 57%. So more than 50% of Pimpri's poor today have access to a home toilet, and the municipal corporation has from 37% taken it to 68%. That's the increase in the drainage networks within the slums. And the other city where we've also worked, like 100% is Kolhapur city. Kolhapur city, from 25% pre-intervention, it has gone to 67% coverage of home toilets. So the incidence of open defecation is almost zero now in Kolhapur, and even the municipal corporation has invested wherever possible in laying new drainage networks. But parts of Kolhapur where networks were not possible, we've given other options like septic tanks or biogas or whatever. So I had briefly mentioned plus, you want to ask something?
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
So, I had a question about spatial data. So in the 90s, how did you manage? Because at that time, was that satellite imaging available?
No, in the late 90s there was no satellite images. I had to use the town planning maps, the city development plans, which was a horror because we couldn't superimpose our slums on them at all because they were not correct. And we used to be up in arms against the Mahapalika officers because they would swear by it like a Bible, you know, for them that was sacrosanct. And when we said that no, this is just not sitting on it, there's something which is not correct. And then when Google Earth was launched, we were able to show them why it was not correct because you know, suddenly you had a satellite image with which you could compare it. And we started superimposing all our maps on Google Earth from 2005, but before that it was a nightmare.
Having said that, the group I was with in the late 1990s did buy satellite imagery from ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization in Ahmedabad. And we would superimpose onto these massive satellite images which were admittedly very expensive.
Yeah.
So a deterrent to many organizations. Onto that we would superimpose Survey of India maps, topographical maps,
Yeah.
And cadastral city survey maps. But we found that once you layered all those maps, there was a huge margin of error.
Yes.
Because to reconcile those and to get them to fit was really difficult.
It was
So
very
you had
tough.
AutoCAD operators who had to sit and then draw polygons using AutoCAD and then to estimate, you know, roughly what features might look like. My question to you is, just your mapping process is itself a fascinating talk. So if we went back to the image of Sanjay Park
Yeah.
right now,
Yeah.
what I notice is that and what I want to ask you about is your base map.
That's the Google Earth.
It is Google Earth, right. Now, have you found in implementing these projects, etc., any problems around drawing on Google Maps? In some parts of the country, in some sensitive military areas, you can't zoom in too far.
Yeah.
Right? So, and what we found was that in a disaster situation, or you know, if there were floods, etc., or an earthquake, and those properties were wiped away, then you'd have court cases because those AutoCAD lines have been drawn approximating the edge of a property, of a building, when it looks blurred right now.
Yeah.
Have you found in locating these slum properties and fixing them on paper, legal problems, differences between community members who say, wait a second, you know, so I was just curious as to whether you...
Yeah. So, you know, when we did our first mapping, we actually hired plane table surveyors to do it. And those were far more accurate, you know, maps, but they were standalone. So, superimposing it on the town planning maps or the development plan maps was a nightmare, as I said. But that was a very expensive process, you know, and as you went along, you know, now total stations is something that has taken over. Nobody does plane table surveys. And total stations are not easy to use because you need a certain width also of a gully for a total station to be stationed and do something. And plus we found we couldn't afford it anymore. So what we've been doing is we actually take an image of the Google Earth, go on the ground, and we actually map it out on the ground freehand. So I'm not going to say that it's accurate because it is not, and that is not the need really for us. Accuracy is not such a great need for us. We just need to be able to give an approximation of this is the house and there might be, if it's a ground plus one house, then we, divide it into two and say that, there's a family A and B or whatever. We have developed a system of doing that. So these all, but what is important is that every house gets recorded, at least approximately, even if it's not 100% accurate. And the lanes and everything are anyway there. What we do is we physically also measure it at 3 or 4 different points, so that then we bring it and then sort of do an approximate, because see, even the Google Earth image, you need to geo-reference it to that image, because even that changes, whenever they update their images, sometimes there is a shift. So then we have to sort of geo-reference it again. So these are kind of problems which come, but in this case, we don't need to have it accurate to the last mm or centimeter, because we are not doing any project which demands that kind of accuracy. What we are trying to do is that, okay, there is a house here, it is without a toilet, it doesn't have water services, but and approximately it is still fairly accurate. I mean, I've looked at Google Earth images and we've actually checked them on the ground. If you were to measure the length, it is not very far off from the actual measurements. So that is something that we have checked on quite a few occasions. In fact, when we did our plus code, which was again with Google, it's an addressing tool developed by Google, which generates a locational ID, which is alphanumeric. What they've done is they've divided the entire globe into 1 by 1 meter grid. So it is down to that level of accuracy. So in a slum, even if a hut is say 10 feet by 10 feet, one of the smallest, it still can get a plus code, which can be navigated on Google Maps. So the whole, this became such a big thing when, especially during COVID. I mean, we've realized it earlier that, okay, having a mapping information, all that is great. But if you have thousands of families, like, the largest slum in Pune has 8,500 families in Janta Vasat, and it's also on a very difficult topography. It's on a hilltop, hill slope. If you have to reach one particular house, you're going to go crazy. You're never going to know how to reach that, because there's no way of navigating to that house. And on top of it, the terrain is difficult. So we said every house needs to have an address. Otherwise, 8,500 families share one address, which is Janta Vasat. Survey number so and so Janta Vasat. That's it. अरे भाई लेकिन जनता वसात में कहाँ, that becomes very, very tough then. So I remember when we were hit by the pandemic, I suddenly had phone calls from Pune Municipal Corporation and Pimpri Chinchwad Municipal Corporation saying that, ma'am, because in the first wave, if you remember, it was in the slums that it really had hit the pandemic. It was more sort of acute there. And they wanted to track and monitor the COVID patients, and they had no way of knowing where those families were. And so they kept looking at us, to give them those directions. And that's when we, luckily, 2 years ago, just before the pandemic hit us, I had been, talking to Google, and we've developed a pretty healthy relationship over the years, because they recognize our efforts way back in 2010 and have made a film on us under their Google Earth Heroes series. They came out with this plus code, and I said, this is what I need to do. Every house must have an address which is navigable on Google Map. So this is what we started doing. And can you see, I mean, this is not a great photograph, but typically if you go on a door in every in any slum, you will find there are many numbers, because different surveys happen and everybody uses their own numbering system, and you don't know who's come and numbered for which survey. So can you see this plate over here? We said if they had one address which everybody can use, then all the data would then be against that one code, which would be unique, because it would be a unique ID, and which can take you. We've tested it out. Google has actually done a quality check. They were so averse to us using Google Earth earlier, but when they realized that we had a system of doing this which was far more efficient than what they had devised, they did a quality check on the ground, and then they realized that we were coming close to 95% accuracy. So any of these addresses that you input on your Google map, it takes you straight to the doorstep of that family in 95% of the case. Pardon?
Who was averse to you using Google Earth? The city.
Google.
Google was averse.
Google was, because see, Google has different departments, you know, the Google map users and the Google Earth developers, and you know, they have different teams doing that.
So they wanted you to use maps.
They wanted us to go and do it physically on the ground. They didn't want us to use Google Earth at all. They wanted us to go on the ground and with very rudimentary ways, you know, using tapes and this and that. They devised a system which was actually very impractical, and then we said,
Why did they want that? Why did they want you to use?
Because they felt that Google Earth might be at least 10 to 15% off accuracy. Then they realized that actually Google Earth was turning to be far more accurate than their methodology, which actually gave us an error sometimes of even 30 feet. And you know, 30 feet in a slum can be like shifting a whole lane. So that was not serving our purpose at all, and it was a very slow and a very tedious process, because they were using footsteps. You know, I found that really strange, because I mean, let's not get into it, but eventually we sort of brought them over and showed them our system, our way of doing it, and then when they did the quality check, they were convinced, and that's how we are doing it now. So this is like the, I'll just go to the plus codes was something that was accepted by the community so readily. I mean, I was really very taken aback, because when we went there to give address, you know, to do an experiment with it, I was not very sure whether people would let us do that. But when we explained the concept behind it, they said, "Madam, this is what we must do," because you know, whenever I try to leverage online service like Swiggy or Amazon, मुझे बस्ती के बाहर जाके मेरा parcel लेना पड़ता है, because I am not able to give them the directions to my house. This will just bring things straight to my doorstep, and I was so taken aback, because you know, Swiggy, Amazon, and a few other online platforms which I have never used, which is being leveraged even by the poor, and that really made me happy that, you know, the technology has found its way, and it has really sort of got itself entrenched into every layer of our society. So just as much as it can work, you know, for communities to leverage you know, emergency services. Okay, the ambulance may not come to your door, but at least it will come as far as it can, you know, as close to your door as possible. Or even an LPG cylinder. Every month you need an LPG cylinder to be delivered to your door, and most of the time when people have to step out and get it, it's quite an ordeal for them. Similarly, we feel that, you know, we've also given plus codes to every toilet, community toilet block, so that whenever there are issues, you know, in a large slum there will be 10, 15 community toilet blocks, to be able to tell the ward that this particular one has, you know, one of the doors which is broken, or a pan which is broken, you know, to be able to get them to navigate. It will actually prove to be a boon if it's used. And if you look at Google Map, typically you will find that where slums are, you will just see an outline. There are no inner lines. I mean, there are no roads inside which are ingested. So if you see the before and after, you will find that now in the slums where we've worked, they have started ingesting roads. I don't think it has come out very clearly in the other one, but you know, the roads are visible now.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know if even I can't see it, so I don't expect you to see it. Can you see some? I think this has, but never mind. I just think it's not a great image. Pardon?
Go back to the previous image, please. Try to reduce the brightness and increase the contrast. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Let's. I mean, I would invite you to see Google Map itself directly and see that for some of the settlements. I want to say that for the vaccination campaigns that we had in slum, that was fantastic, because we were able to tell the ward office which were the houses which had people who had taken just one dose, or both the doses, or not even a single dose. We were able to give them the plus codes and the name of that person in that house whom they had to go and reach out to. So we found it fantastic, you know, during the vaccination camps to actually work with the municipal corporations and give them that kind of detail. We've also used it for tracking and monitoring waste collection and increasing the collection in slums, you know, using using our mapping information as a tool and with lots of robust community mobilization. We are now working to see how water meters can be also you know, given to every family in slums of Kolhapur. But you know, I would like to fast forward and really look at the slum rehab project, because I think I've spent, how much time is there?
We have time.
We have time. I don't want to, I don't want people to fall asleep even though it's a small crowd. Okay, so I think the sanitation project has given you an enough idea that we really drill down, you know, to granular data. We want every house, every manhole, every water stand post, everything captured, and this data is then used for even coming out with citywide housing strategies. And these are some of the photographs of some of the projects that we've already implemented on the ground. This was one of our first projects, Dattawadi, which was in 96, 97. It was not a very big one, but it was, I think to me, it was a milestone project because we actually got the people trained to build their own houses, and it was not easy doing this. They made their own blocks, they made their own funicular shells, they made their own, you know, roofing systems. 56 families, but they did a fabulous job, and within a year they had their houses ready, and this was like a standalone project. Between 2003 and 2005, we did a larger project which was about 175 houses, where it was a relocation from a flood affected settlement to you know, Hadapsar, which was about 8 kilometers away, where families moved very willingly, and they were very involved in the design process and the implementation also. And a much larger project that we did between 2010 and 2015, that was in Sangli Miraj Kupwad Municipal Corporation. To me, this was really very exciting because this is the first time that we leveraged data across the city to come out with a more holistic kind of solution for rehabilitation of the poor, and I'll spend a little time explaining this. So, Sangli Miraj is about 250 kilometers south of Pune. It was a young municipal corporation at that time when we were working, and it had 78 slums. We had mapped every settlement because we were running a sanitation program there, and we had certain amount of data for every family. But one of the things that once we laid out that data and queried it, one of the things that came you know, actually shocked us, I would say, was that 35 slums out of 78 needed to move at some point or the other because they were on extremely vulnerable pieces of land, or they were hugging roads which were going to be widened at some point, or they were on reservation land, which meant that, you know, they would need to vacate that at some point. The city was of course not aware of this situation. In fact, I remember a lot of councillors coming and telling me, this is the first time we've seen all the slums laid out so beautifully on the entire map, the city's map, because they'd never seen it before. So then we said, okay, typically, you know, when slums have to be shifted, they're taken to the periphery. They move to the outskirts because that's where probably the land is cheaper, and that's where the government can afford to buy, you know, acquire land and build their housing. But what happens is people refuse to go there because they get completely uprooted from livelihoods, from their occupation, from all the social amenities that they are using. And this kind of a move actually hits the girl child the hardest, because in the city of Sangli in 2004, 2005, there was a project under the Valmiki Ambedkar Awas Yojana, which led to thousands of houses being built on the outskirts of the city, and families were forcibly evicted and rehabilitated there. Of course, most of the houses now lie vacant and they're abused, and I mean they've been vandalized and it's completely gone to the dogs. But why this happened was that because, you know, the girl child education stopped. There were no transport system, no, you know, there was no way people could even afford that kind of you know, expense coming to the city, and it completely ruined, their day-to-day life and their livelihood opportunities. So most of them vacated those houses and came right back into the city. So we said, this should not happen. If there's a relocation, then it should happen more than 2 to 3 kilometers max from where they are, so that they can continue to, have the same occupation. They can continue to, go to the same school and use the same amenities that they have been using. So we started looking at which were the tenable slums, which were slums on government land which were tenable, which could be developed to a slightly higher density to create an extra housing stock, which could then absorb the slums which were in their vicinity of 2 to 3 kilometers, which needed to move. So if you see here, you will find that, can you see these circles that we have drawn? You will see something in blue that became the receiving pocket, and all the slums in red are the ones which needed to move. So they were the ones which would move to those receiving pockets, which would be redeveloped to a slightly higher density. Now this was welcome, because in some cases people found that they were actually moving closer to the city center, and which opened up even more possibilities for them. And this whole resentment or rebellion, about moving, just died down once we showed them where they were and where they would, be moved. And when they realized it was not really that far and it was still doable and they would get a secure tenure, which was the most important thing, people agreed to move. And so at the end of the day, I mean, the project was really for 3,400 families. What we were able to do was only about 1,400, because we were up against a lot of political tussles and vested interests, which did not allow us to do the project in its entirety. But those 1,400 families at least got access to a much better housing. But what we have been doing more recently is, we decided that this exercise in Sangli really needs to be taken across at least tier 2 cities, where the pressures of SRA or private public partnership is not that high and will not work in tier 2 cities. So we looked at Kolhapur, because we've been working on in the sanitation space in Kolhapur for 5-6 years. So we did a study. We looked at the slum. There are about 56 slums in Kolhapur, and we realized that 44 slums were on government land. So 80% of Kolhapur's poor live on government land, either urban local body their land, or the state government's land, or maybe the central government's land. So we said, let's see if we can come out with rehabilitation strategies for this particular city, for their poor. So we looked at several parameters. We looked at, we did a rapid infrastructure mapping. We ran special surveys related to housing. We did a lot of focus group discussion. We looked at the existing DP rules. We looked at the land rates. We looked at reservations, land values, land areas. All these things were studied in great depth. And then we started looking at, we did an analysis in terms of land ownership, land reservation, which were the tenable, which were the untenable, slums. So this was this report is there on our website. So if somebody wants to read it in detail, all this is there. I won't go into too much detail, because there are quite a few slides which will be following. But what I want to say is that we created a vulnerability matrix, which looked at land reservation, which looked at dwelling densities, what's the average area per person, the kind of structural condition, the kind of land values that they were sitting on, economic conditions. So these were the parameters against which we rated the slums, and then we decided which were most vulnerable, which were kind of vulnerable, and which were the least vulnerable amongst them. And then we started looking at, we started drawing 2 kilometers radius around the most vulnerable slums to see, is there a possibility for them to be moved to more tenable kind of areas. So I'll just go into this just to explain this concept a little bit more. So for instance, this particular slum it's called Kamgar Chawl. It's a tenable slum, but it has a very high density, so there was no possibility of creating any extra housing stock. But the slum itself needed to be redeveloped, we feel, to completely, because the way it is right now, just giving them a pakka house was not going to do anything much in terms of their quality of life, because they are off very, very narrow lanes. So if you were to do a pakka house, which would typically convert into a G+1, because they have to get a 300 square feet tenement, and if they want to avail of, say, anything under Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, they would need to go G+1, which means it would be even worse, because you will never get any natural air, ventilation, nothing. And I was recently pointed to a very interesting study which has been done in the slums of Mumbai. They are looking at tuberculosis, and they find the incidence of tuberculosis very, very high in slums as compared to the non-slum area. And one of the major reasons is there's not enough light, there's not enough ventilation coming in. And this is one of the things that I've been battling against, because there is a lot of talk about in situ upgradation, which continuously keeps playing like a record in most of discussions like this. And I always think that, what is this in situ upgradation? You're really saying that if we have captured a particular footprint, then you just upgrade that house, right? I mean, that is what it actually translates into. And I think that's one of the worst kind of solutions, because what it does is that it cuts off even whatever little light and ventilation is coming the moment you go up and you're off those narrow lanes. And secondly, it's only a kacha house that has become a pakka house. Nothing really has improved within that. And this has been my battle, because I've always believed that if you're looking at, and especially now with the pandemic and everything, if you're going to place the well-being of a human being at the center of it, then if necessary, you have to redesign, redevelop those settlements, so that people have a certain level of physical well-being that is ensured, because they're living in healthy spaces. And so this has been a continuous battle. So in this particular case, this slum, though it was tenable, though it was on government land, it could never be a receiving pocket, but it needed to be really redeveloped. On the other hand, there are, I'll just take you to the next one. Okay, this is Kamgar Chawl. So we are saying that if this is the existing Kamgar Chawl, maybe this is something that they should do, ground plus 3. We don't believe in very high rises, because we find that it never works for the poor to go very high. G+3 is the max that we would suggest, and it's possible. So we have done this exercise with the people. They've realized that within the existing footprint, they can never get something which is habitable for them. And this is probably one of the options that can be worked out. But then we also look at land sharing. Now this is a second kind of a cluster that has emerged. Here you have this particular slum called Datta Mandir. Datta Mandir has 2 roads, proposed roads, which are going to crisscross across that settlement. And that road is further going to go up, and it is going to affect one slum completely and the other one partially. So you're going to have 2 settlements which is in the vicinity of just barely 1.5 kilometers, which are going to get affected. So we feel that if Datta Mandir can become the receiving pocket, because the proposed roads are going to go like this in Datta Mandir, if we can come out with some kind of a rehab package for the people of Datta Mandir, as well as for the 2 settlements which are in its vicinity, it's possible and it's doable. So we've also given some solutions in that particular report of ours. And the third case study was Kandalgaon, which is on non-buildable zone. It is in the green belt. There is no way you can do anything with that slum. It just has to move. So we looked at which is the nearest tenable slum that it can go to, and Vare Vasat, which has about 250 families, is the nearest tenable slum. And so we started looking at solutions within Vare Vasat, G+3, partially maybe row houses kind of development, partially G+3 kind of development. I mean, there are several options that we have iterated as per the ground realities. But while we were doing this, we stumbled across this reality that some houses in a very ad hoc manner have been given property cards by either the state government or by the collector's office or by the municipal corporation, because this land partly belongs to the municipal corporation, partly belongs to the collector. And we don't know on what basis they made that selection, but it was very, very ad hoc. Can you see the ones in yellows and blues? Now those are the ones who have a property card. So how do you redevelop this slum, in any kind of a planned manner? So there have been a lot of these kind of issues which have come about, and which need lot of deep diving and drilling, and one of the things that was very surprising was that, like now this particular cluster, it's one property, shown as one property, but it has 4 houses and 4 shops. If they had to avail of the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana, they would need to show a setback of almost 5 to 10 feet, which is here, which would reduce their footprint, and they would need to build it up to 300 square feet, which means they would have to go ground plus 2. Now most people have, that's why kept, steered clear of using any of Prime Minister Awas Yojana's funding, and that's why it hasn't done well at all, especially in Maharashtra. PMAY has really, there has been hardly any takers for PMAY because of some of these very ridiculous rules and regulations which have been very prohibitive. I won't go into this too much, but and the other problem is subsidies, they are given in tranches, and that never comes in time. And so a few families whom we studied who had the courage to even take loans under the PMAY, some of them have had to abandon their home and their construction because they just couldn't make ends meet. While they've completed parts of it, they haven't received the money in time. So it's really very hard with the government not participating the way they should, where the people also not being fully aware of the situation vis-a-vis their tenure, as well as the government rules and regulation. You need somebody to bring all of this together, even for people to even venture into housing, and that's why I think housing for the poor has really not taken off in most of the cities. But I mean, there's a toolkit also that we've put out on our website. If anybody is interested, please go through it. There is a current housing project that we have very
I have a question on PMAY. Like in rural India, we see it's more successful, like having worked in the rural parts of the country where they
yeah.
1,50,000 in tranches, and so why is this, like, in the rural parts people are taking it, and but in,
because in the rural part people see what happens in PMAY is that you first of all cannot ask for a PMAY fund grant unless you have tenure security, which I think is great. Because the first 3 projects that we have implemented, people still don't have tenure security there. There's no piece of paper that they have with them which says that you own this house. The government, local governments have just not done that. Whereas in PMAY they are saying, first get your tenure security and only then we will give you the funds. Now in slums, getting a tenure security is like a nightmare. And let me explain that nightmare to you through this project. I want everybody to understand that a housing project in a slum, the gestation period is anywhere between 5 to 7 years. So if you have enormous patience and if you have a good sense of humor, only then get into it. Otherwise, and if you have some funding support, only then get into it. Otherwise, just forget it.
I just wanted to add to your question and just to respond by saying that one big difference is that in cities we have urban legislation, that is statewide urban legislation that decides from the very top to the very bottom what can be done, and there are different actors. There's Pratima, there's urban planners working for the city, who do everything according to what the Development Act for the state says. But in villages we have no commensurate rural legislation. So when you don't have a piece of enabling legislation in villages, it's much easier in fact to be able to.
It's easier, and they're many times they're standalone houses. You're not sharing a common wall with anyone, right? So you can avail of that and build your own house. To that extent, it is easier. So these 2 things are very important, because those are not the conditions that you have in slums, right? Typically, 3 walls are being shared. with people, and everybody has captured a different footprint also depending on when they've come. So you are up against all odds, and tenure security, just getting tenure security is a nightmare. So I wanted to give you.
Just to add the social protection infrastructure, like in the rural area, the panchayat is your champion. The
panchayat is your champion.
But in urban areas, who will like take your case forward? So is that an issue
that is a big issue, because there's no one to take your case forward, and that's why the governments drew them own manmani, and this is precisely why I want to show you this slide.
But there are no mohalla committees here?
Mohalla committees are there only in Pune. It's not there even in Pimpri-Chinchwad or in any of the cities that we are working in. And even in Pune, it is not represented by slums. I mean, if you are part of a Mohalla committee, you will know how many slum dwellers show up for a Mohalla committee meeting. Nobody. So we've been trying to push that also. So in Kolhapur, when the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana was announced, every urban local body was keen to showcase at least 1 or 2 projects under PMAY. So Bondre Nagar was one of the settlements that they chose.
Which city is this in? Which city is this in?
Kolhapur.
Oh,
now Bondre Nagar was a settlement which was at the edge of the city, and they thought it's a small settlement, so let's start with this. So what did they come up with? Which, without consulting the people at all, they said, let's do an affordable housing scheme over here. So what is the affordable housing scheme? They would actually have 2 blocks of 2 buildings with 4 flats on each floor going up to 12-story. This would be the saleable component, and this saleable component would then subsidize the people living in that settlement, and they would be taken up to 7 stories also. And they actually did a detailed project report, because there was a consultant from Thane who had come, who had been appointed by the Kolhapur Municipal Corporation, who prepared this DPR, which went to the state government without the people really being aware of what was happening, and luckily it didn't get approved there. But by that time, when people got to know that something like this happening, because it started coming out in the news and a lot of other media, then they saw, and then they came running to us, and they said, we don't want to be in 7-storied buildings. And we were aghast, because if you look at Bondre Nagar is on the edge of the city. It's literally on the edge of the city, and there's hardly any development around it. Yeah, the tenement densities are okay, not too high, but the land value was one of the lowest in the ready reckoning, which means even if you were doing affordable housing, there wouldn't have been any builder who would even touch that with a pole, because it really made no economic sense. This is the settlement. It has mostly people, these were farm laborers who were resettled here when in the 80s, when a major fire broke out in their earlier settlement. So they were given this piece of land and they were resettled here, and this land belongs to the state government. So technically under the collector. This was the kind of housing, and a lot of this is in mud mortar. They look like bricks, but they're all in mud mortar. So when they came to us, we started this whole process with them. We said, this Mosini is something which, funnily enough, nobody does right in the beginning, and that is such a game changer. To know the exact demarcation and the boundary of a particular slum is so important, because all your designs are going to be on that, and if that is not established right at the outset, I don't know how you can prepare a DPR and submit it to anyone, because the DPR that was submitted did not even do the Mosini. And when we went ahead and did the Mosini, we found that the land actually shrunk, because there was an 18-meter wide road which was going to eat part of that plot, and it was part of the slum was already spilling over to a neighboring privately owned property. So that itself gave us, did I go back? Okay. So then we started looking at what are the possibilities. One of the things is that we realized that 20% of the families would get affected by the Mosini, and they would not be able to get a house of their own because they were getting cut off because of that road and the neighboring plot.
Could you define Mosini?
Mosini is
It's a measurement, government
it's a government
Government
measurement.
survey of the land.
government survey of the land, which is sacrosanct. I mean, they actually measure it out, give it to you, and you have to go by that. So then we went through this entire process, you know, of what was the possibility. We said, unless you share land, we're not going to be able to do, we're not going to be able to include everybody in your community. So the first step that they accepted, you know, and wholeheartedly adopted was land sharing. So everybody said they would get equal houses. Then, you know, the concept of what is 200 square feet, what is 300 square feet, 100 square feet. So we actually started doing life scale plans on, you know, the neighboring plots which was vacant, so that people get an understanding. There was a lot of mobilization that we did. We made sure that community representatives were also present during our you know, discussions with the urban local body, the municipal commissioner, or the you know, the political leaders. And after going through really a very, very intensive process, we literally rewrote the entire detailed project report. I remember when the municipal commissioner first visited this slum, he was completely taken aback. He said, we were planning to do an affordable housing project on this piece of land where there's hardly anything around, and we were going to do a 12-story building. He started laughing, which meant that he had never visited, he had no clue what was happening there. Everything was outsourced to an external consultant who just did whatever he felt was, you know, was appropriate. So now what we have done is, you know, we have, now this is the blue line is the reduced version of that plot. We have come out with a plan which is like cluster of 4 with a central courtyard, and it gives them almost 450 square feet in all, with a little bit of courtyard space and a little bit of you know, sorry. You know, there's a little bit of terrace on top that they get, and they all wanted to step out, you know, to their toilets. So there is this courtyard which sorry. So this is where they have their toilets. They step out, you know, this is the entrance, a small hall, a kitchen, and they could either have a sort of an attached toilet from inside or even from outside. And then they go up to the first floor, which gives them, you know, kind of 2 rooms, this one and that one, and 1 room which would then spill out to the little terrace over the toilet, which is what you see in the section. This is something that the people really liked, and if you look at this, this is how the original settlement was. This is what it is now. This is all conforming to town planning norms, and you know, the open spaces were just hardly any, you know, in the original way the spaces were organized. Now you have, of course, a 10% mandatory open space, and plus you have little spaces, you know, courtyard spaces which are like bringing in more light, ventilation. Densities have got better distributed, as you can see over here. You know, some of these were really dense pockets. Now you have a far more even distribution. So right now this site has been cleared. People have you know, taken their own responsibility for their transit camps. They've built their own transit camps right across that 18-meter wide road which they were allowed to use. They have registered themselves into a cooperative society. They have started saving a little bit. This proposal has been vetted by the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana. It has been approved by the PMAY, and the land has also been now cleared. This is what it looks like now. You know, these are the temporary shacks that they have built. This is what the land looks like now. You know, it's vacated. Now we are kind of ready to build, and we are waiting for the PMAY funds to come through. Anybody has any questions on this? I can take that before I move on. There's a lot of fundraising that we are doing now around this crowdfunding, so I'm going to make an appeal to all of you to spread the word around. I'll share the link with you, Khusru, so that you can.
How much of this is being sponsored by the PMAY?
See, now the cost of this house is going to be like 7.5 lakhs, of which 2.5 comes from the PMAY. The people are going to try and take a loan. I mean, that's the whole process that we are trying to now see if they can get a loan up to 2.5 lakhs. And part of it we are trying to see if we can raise it from other sources, which would then just make it a little easier on the families. So these are 77 families for whom this whole project is being, and this I am told will be the first of its kind in Maharashtra under the Prime Minister's Awas Yojana. A complete rehabilitation has not yet happened.
Who's doing the contracting? How will you select the contractor?
We are yet in the process of selecting the contractor. We are, we are waiting for some of the funds, the first tranche of the PMAY to come, and we've finished the costing and the estimation and the structural drawings and all of that. So we are soon, going to. The community is going to be. We are helping them out to tender it out, and then. Do you know any good contractors in Kolhapur?
Yeah, we can find out.
If you can help us with that.
And what about services, water, drainage?
Oh, that's great. I'm glad you asked that.
How are you doing that? And
Yeah.
also,
So what we did.
Is that distributed amongst each house? The cost?
No, that's been taken up by the urban local body. So all the common infrastructure is something that they are going to be funding through their government programs like drainage networks, water, roads, all that is being.
And MSEB will give them an electrical connection.
And then the people will have to take it in.
They will get the light will come.
They'll have to do it.